On PM Express tonight, you may have noticed if you are a worker, times are hard for workers. And because of that, the government in the last 2 days have been meeting with the labor unions, the leadership of the labor unions, at a really interesting labor conference to discuss the challenges and also to find a solution to them. Tonight, we're going to be talking to the labor union leaders who were there on this very important subject of the workers' welfare in the midst of an economic crisis. Let's get on to it, because this is a bread and butter conversation that affects all workers indeed. And workers, really, they are the lifeblood of this economy. A few things that we now know have been discussed and agreed at this particular conference. One is to tackle the issue of high tariffs, right? That is a key point that the workers talk about. In other words, the issues that affect your salary, your income, the cost of living, and makes it very hard for the worker to live a meaningful life, right? To take home the pay. Also address the issue of depreciation of the cedi. That is key. If you are paid 2,000 cedis and a cedi depreciates against the dollar, you may have 2,000 cedis, but that 2,000 cedi has lost a significant value. What you could buy the day before, you can't buy going forward. So workers have told government, and government has agreed that they need to address that particular problem. As we speak currently, it is an issue. We'll come to that. Reform the Fair Wages and Salaries Commission, because they often sit in the middle trying to resolve the issues. Also, solve the high cost of doing business in Ghana was one of the key things, high cost of doing business. Some workers who are involved in this area know that it's very, very tough to do business in Ghana. They also wanted to review the single spine salary structure. That is a spine based on which workers are paid, mainly in the public sector, right across the board. Doctors, nurses, etc., all paid on the single spine. Now, when we're talking, remember, this conversation has become relevant because nobody can object to the assertion that times are hard. Times are hard everywhere in the world. Prices of fuel, the crude is going up. Check everywhere. It is a global phenomenon. The world economy is struggling. When the world economy struggles, poor countries struggle even more. And that's the Ghana story, right? And so we're seeing extreme hardship locally, a trickle-down effect from what is happening at the global level. We're feeling it here, right, quite strongly. And all this, including the Russian invasion and everything, is coming on the back of COVID, right? And where we're trying to recover, and then we're hit hard by external factors. And so times are hard. A few things to look at when you're talking about times are hard. Let's come local. Let's come Ghana. Fuel prices up by more than 17% since December 2001. Transport fares up by 15%. LPG, and I learned this today to my ultra shock, up by more than 32%. LPG. And that's the thing about LPG. The LPG was supposed to be the fuel for the poor, right? The fuel for the poor. Because it was meant to replace charcoal, burning of firewood, etc. for the poor. It's gone up by 32% since October 2001. That is really shocking. Have you filled your gas cylinder recently? You'll be paying extremely more. In fact, for what we are learning, tomorrow the price will go up. All this affects the worker's pocket. You feel it in your pocket, and I'm sure all of you are feeling it in your pocket. So get in touch with us tonight, because your leaders are going to join me. How are they representing your interest in these difficult times? And then the big one, we've talked about this on the show, the ratings downgrade. That is a big deal. And last time when we did a KK and Fish analysis, we stressed the impact on you, the worker, when they downgrade. When they downgrade, your government is going to pay more for the debt. More for the debt means less for everything else, including workers' welfare, right? So that is key. Now let's look at another thing, the cedi dollar depreciation. This is one of the most painful things that workers are feeling right now in this country. The cedi is collapsing against the dollar, and because of that, we are beginning to see the prices going real up on the market, right? But let's put this in a historical context. My research thing did this, pull this up from the Bank of Ghana. Right now, we are talking about cedi has lost its value of 4.7%. The whole of last year, it lost 3.9 3%. So that is alarming, right? The whole of last year, the cedi lost 3.93% of the value. This year alone, in just February, 2 months, it's lost more than it lost the whole of last year. That definitely is alarming. But if you put in the general context, right, historically, if you compare 2021, the whole of last year, you will see 2015, 18.75%, historic collapse of the cedi. Some say, well, we survived it. We ended up at IMF the last time this happened, and so it's not good. You don't want to get there. But if you look at the way we started for 2 months of 4.70%, it is alarming. We may beat this. We don't want that to happen. But the problem is the worker is beginning to feel this. This is eating into your pocket on a daily basis, right? The worker is feeling this in his pocket, because if you go to the market, we import everything, and everything is priced in dollars. So your cedi that you earn, what you take home, the cedi, it's pretty small and devalued in the face of everything that's happening. And then we have the issue of the LPG price that I talked about. Now let's illustrate the point I was making. My shock today when we pull the data. If you look at, we are comparing last year March to this year, right? A period of 1 year, same period, March 1 to March to March, right? We are talking about LPG price has gone up, if you look at the same period, right, over the last 1 year, by 53.7%. 53.7% jump in price in 1 year for a fuel product that is meant for the poor. That is really shocking. And if you look at just this, from October to March, as we're talking about 23%, that is significant. That is very, very huge indeed for a product that is for the poor. So the workers are feeling this very strongly. If you look also at Ghana's rising debt stock is going up, right? But let me illustrate this point with this, right? Interest payments. Why is debt an issue for the worker? Because government have to pay interest. And when government is paying interest, it's opportunity cost. The more interest you pay, the less money available for the worker, right? That is the story here. And the debt trajectory tells the story, climbing ever upwards, and this is really alarming. But then if you come to this table here, talking about issuance, that's what government plans to borrow. Government really plans to borrow domestically. So government is going to borrow a significant amount of money. January, February, March, a total of 24 billion is what government hopes to borrow. If government does borrow, 20.7 billion of what government hopes to borrow, right, is going to go into just paying, maturities, right? Rollover maturity. So when you have bonds and it matures, government is going to take 20.7 of that to pay those who have invested with it, right? Taking their bonds. Only 3.8 billion is left for everything else, including satisfying workers, cushioning them in this time of a challenge. But I'm going to end on this thing. We always show you this because this is really, for me, what drives home the point. If you look at it, for the very first time, for so long, single span and everything else that has happened in the past, workers' compensation, what government spends on compensation to pay workers, has always been the biggest line item in the budget. But for the very first time this year, we are looking at a reverse of that, where payment of interest, right? Interest payment is more than payment for workers. But with a downgrade, as I explained the last time, the possibility is what we even budgeted to pay for this year may be more. And as I explain all the time, if we are paying more for interest, there's going to be less available for compensation to workers, right? And so times are indeed difficult. And so we're going to be having a conversation with the union leaders. How are they coping? How are their members coping? How are they representing their interests? They've been meeting government over the last 2 days. I mean, are these unique, peculiar environmental, economic conditions factoring into how they're representing their workers? And how is the worker surviving? We're going to talk about that. You want to stay and hear your leaders, what they are doing to best represent your interest at the table in negotiations with government and etc., bearing in mind the economic challenges that the country is facing. Do they accept the government is simply broke right now and maybe is unable to give them all the things they want? Are they willing to sacrifice a bit more and wait till everything is, the economy is back on track? then they can make demand. Very interesting conversation. I'm really looking forward to this. Stay with me after the break. We'll sit down and talk to the leaders. Thanks for staying with me. My guest joining me via Zoom is Dr. Kwabena Nyarko Otu. He is the Director of the Labor Policy and Research Institute of the TUC. And the TUC obviously is the, as they say, the umbrella body, the mother big one. And so they are always in the room when conversations are happening. I'm grateful. Dr. Otu, thank you for your time here on PM Express. Thank you that you could join me. Dr. Samuel Boedi-Kusi is a UTAC president. University of Cape Coast, and he's joining me right now for this conversation. He has so many members under his watch. I wonder what his thoughts are on this. Dr. Isaac Bampoado is Executive Secretary of the Similar Local Government Staff Association. He's going to join us in the studio pretty shortly. And in the studio with me already is the Angel Carbono. You know him already. He is the President, National Association of Graduate Teachers, NAGRAT. Thank you, gentlemen, for your time. Let me start with you, Mr. Carbono. So let's start with the bread and butter question. You lead your association. How big is it? How many members you have in your ranks?
Well, the general teaching fraternity in Ghana is over 360,000. NAT commands the largest membership, and the NAGRAT commands about some 35,000 of the teaching profession, majority of who are university graduates in the Ghana Education Service.
How are you faring? I mean, you are the leader. How are you faring in these times?
Well, you get the pressure from members because members will send you messages and complaints about how come that looking at the dire economic situation that we find ourselves, why is leadership not going to review incomes and emoluments, conditions of service, because there is a direct reflection of the items that you've enumerated. For example, the depreciation of the cedi, high cost of fuel, LPG gas, and so on and so forth. There's a direct relationship with all these increases to the very life standard of living of the people down there. So it is felt. And whenever you see that there is a tempestuous relationship between labor and government, anytime, it's a direct reflection of the economic situation and how that economic situation is hitting hard that worker. So it is not a fanfare issue, but it's just a reaction to the actual action that is happening in our homes. And that is the exact situation we find ourselves now. Because, for example, today you go to the market for to get information on the relation between the cedi and the dollar. You get a figure today, and tomorrow afternoon when you go,
it's gone up.
It's gone up. I mean, even traders are not even able to plan. And mortgages in this country mostly are indexed in dollars. So it tells you how difficult it is for people to keep up. Especially when you realize that your salaries have been kept stagnant for a while. So these are direct hits. And those of our kids who are taking foreign courses will have to go and look for more cedis to exchange, to change the cedis into dollars or other foreign currencies to be able to pay school fees. So those categories are also there. When you get into our shopping malls and our markets in this country, food items, services are indexed in dollars. So this is how directly the worker suffers from the situation that we find ourselves.
I mean, let me bring in the TUC. Dr. Otu, I mean, the TUC, you are, the umbrella body as far as this is concerned. I mean, you've been in this work for so long. I'll come to the labor conference shortly and what you agreed. But how is it being felt within your ranks at TUC? How bad is it, I guess, is the question.
Thank you, and thanks for having me. I mean, the statistics you showed are correct statistics, and no one can deny the fact that those kinds of statistics will impact negatively on workers. So the exchange rate depreciation feeds directly into increases in general price levels. So that's why you see inflation rising. And historically, for groups of workers whose incomes are fixed during a particular year, such rising prices automatically hit them very hard. because the incomes are fixed. And I mean, our data actually indicate that incomes have declined rapidly in real terms over the several few years. What that means is that if you had 1 cedi today and you could buy something with it, tomorrow you may not be able to buy the same things with it. So standards of living falls, workers' hardships increases. But I mean, you also point to the fact that these are very global trends. Rising inflation is now the norm everywhere. America has had the highest inflation in the last 40 years, the same with the UK. So there are a number of contextual issues. But the bottom line is that those issues are actually impacting workers in Ghana negatively.
I mean, let me bring in Dr. Samuel Boedikusi. Doc, UTAC has been on strike, and so you are this year first to really show your concern, through proper action in improving your working conditions. I wonder how the action you took was influenced by the prevailing economic conditions.
Hello. Yes. So basically, the action we took was largely, yes, influenced by the prevailing situation. Because you see, we have also been looking at the real value of how much we take home, and how it has depreciated, and how, I mean, the average lecturer is not able to make ends meet. And so, if you look at all the indicators as has been enumerated by my colleagues on the panel, the picture is not so different from what the average lecturer is suffering from. Indeed, in our situation, it is even much more difficult, because, I mean, you hold titles and people sometimes, you know how our situation is. You are at a function and people are talking about your titles, and people expect that whatever you are dishing out will commiserate with your title. But it ends up that it's actually just like a prestige and nothing more in terms of real monetary value terms. And so these are real challenges that, I mean, the average lecturer faces, which, of course, is one of the reasons why at some point we had to go the way we went, although that is always not the best way to go, and it's always a last resort. And so largely the economic indicators is what has influenced the situation that the lecturer had to find itself in.
From what I understand, you actually just literally walked out of a meeting with government on your concerns. You happy with how it's progressing? What's the latest on this?
Well, unfortunately I cannot speak to that. Unfortunately, unfortunately I have to disappoint you on this occasion, because it's an ongoing process, and I'm sure when we conclude we will be able to come out. But for now, kindly indulge me.
No, I mean, no problem with that. I mean, let me come back to you, Dr. Otu, with the TUC. So we are having this obvious economic challenge, and we've all established that the worker is really taking a hit here. So what is the TUC? What's the TUC approach? I'm very curious about this. What's the TUC approach in times like this? And since you've done this for a while, give us a historical, sort of context to this. Have you seen it this bad? And how do you, from a labor leadership point of view, begin to address the concerns that you hear every day from the workers you represent?
Okay, so yes, I mean, for the TUC and its unions, our approach has always been dialogue. So you can declare a strike, you can go onto the street and demonstrate, but at the end of the day, you still have to talk about the issues that actually sent you into the streets. And I mean, the figures you showed gave a certain historical hint. In 2015, when we had such dire situations, we did exactly with government what we did about 2 days ago, a dialogue on the single spine pay policy and what we need to be doing In actual fact, if you remember very well, even the Senche consensus was the idea of the TUC.
Oh, okay.
Yes, we issued a statement and asked for a national dialogue on the economy. Okay. So our strategy actually has always been to dialogue with government over such critical issues. Because when we negotiate, we are negotiating for better wages, better improving, better working conditions and living conditions for our members. But that kind of negotiation is always surrounded by contextual issues. And some of those issues are what you have actually laid bare this evening. So it is always important that you take those contextual issues. Whether you like it or not, they will be at the bargaining table. And it's important that you dialogue to really understand what's going on, to strengthen your own position on such matters. But let me also indicate to you that even before this current economic challenges, we've always had problems with the pay situation in Ghana. In actual fact, if you take workers on a single spine, arrear wages on the single spine have declined since 2012. Okay. We've also had a problem of rising wage inequities in the public sector. So you compare single spine with, say, Article 71, you compare with salaries in the state enterprises. Then you find that a large number of people on the single spine are actually not given a fair deal in terms of remuneration in Ghana. So all of these are issues we need to deal with, in addition to the issues that have come up in this economic crisis that we find ourselves in. And our approach has always been to deal with issues more holistically. Unions will go on strike, unions will demonstrate, will do an action. But the fact of the matter is this: if you address the issue for one union, the other unions will come up.
That's true.
It's always important that you deal with the issues more holistically, rather than piecemeal and in isolated cases.
You raise a very important point that about if you address one person's problem, like you address UTAG right now, NAGRAT will come and say, but we are all in the same economy. I mean, I'll come to that question, but on the back of the TUC's approach, it says they are dialoguing, and that's why they went into this labor conference, which NAGRAT boycotted. So your approach, I presume, is different from what you've heard.
No, from our point of view, the biting economic situation presently demands a more radical approach than the usual dialogue and discussions. Because what our members expect now is to see how we can get onto the table for government to recognize the dire economic situation and how it is impacting on us, and do something immediately, because you cannot postpone suffering. You cannot postpone hunger. You understand? If you used to buy 1 cylinder LPG at a certain price, and it is gone up by 35% since October, it tells you that you cannot buy that same quantum. And so maybe either you go and look for some fuel wood somewhere to augment your energy needs, domestic energy needs. So we felt that the situation that we find ourselves, and please, the politician did not just wake up overnight and realize that we are in this situation, nor did the worker rise up one night and realize that we are having some level of challenges. So we felt that the approach ought to be a little bit radical. And when I use the term radical here, I am not talking about violence. I am talking about a more radical approach in finding immediate solutions so as to hold at bay the extent of pressure on the worker. Then we can go on and look at the general economy. Because you see, the politician made promises to you and I. And those who were supposed to interrogate the politician wanted to be politically correct and allow the politician to go awry, when basic economic principles indicated to us, even at the time the politician was making those promises, that those promises were not going to be sustainable. Where were the intellectuals in our society? Where were the opinion leaders in our society? Who was able to contest the promises that were made to the people? And today, the consequences of those promises is falling on all of us. And you cannot call me to the table because I did not make those promises with you, nor did I execute those promises with you to achieve a certain level.
But how do you get what you want if you don't talk.
No, yes. Yes, of course, definitely. When we even demand increases in salaries and emolument, you have to go to the table. You understand? But we see the labor conference in Nkoko as a more general approach to issues looking at the general economy. Look, there are foundations of this economy that you are not going to use 1 year to solve.
They're not even a decade.
No, not even a decade. You're right. So if we go to a labor conference and you tell government not to borrow too much, the fact that when even government starts borrowing today, the effect on it is going to be in the next 10 or 15 years. Because borrowing has been done in your name and you are going to pay in the next 10, 15 years. Right. So we expect, and then again, one of the reasons why we boycotted the conference was that labor itself did not hold its caucus meeting
Before.
to go to that conference with a common voice. You understand? We didn't hold any meeting, we didn't hold any dialogue amongst ourselves to take a common position which will become a reflection of the desire of the workers to a labor conference and defend that position before government. That was not done.
Hold on. I mean, Dr. Bedkusi, you are at the labor conference. I mean, let me first bring in TUC, because TUC very instrumental player in this conference. I mean, Dr. Otu, what's your response to that? That there wasn't a united position before you went in?
Okay, so before that, you see, there are general statements that sometimes confounds specific issues that we are confronted with. So the promises by politicians, it is not up to TUC or anybody that when a politician mounts a political platform and make promises, we go after them to checkmate them, or, I mean, these are things for the media. We have specific issues we deal with when people have been elected into government and they are ruling the country. And it is important that we focus on those specific issues. Those issues relate to the welfare of our members. Okay. Now, I mean, I indicated to you that this is not the first time we are doing the labor conference. We have done some before. And it's surprising to hear some of the accusations that you go in to tell government not to borrow and not to do that. In fact, in the Senche consensus, for example, there was something about borrowing. Okay. Because, as you indicated, the large interest payment government has to make ultimately means that it cannot find the money compensation. So, of course, these are contextual issues you cannot ignore when you go into a conference like this. It's very unfortunate that NAGRAT boycotted the conference. I mean, we, in our view, we were radical. And as he said, it's not violent. We were radical in the analysis of the wage situation of workers. The absolutely low wages workers enjoy on the single span. The rapidly declining real incomes workers have on the single span. The rising inequities in pay and conditions of service. For the majority on the single span and for those that are on the other structures, we were very radical. And if you like, I can send you the presentations we did. Okay. Of course, if NAGRAT wanted a caucus, he could have asked for it. Okay. And I would have loved to have that kind of caucus.
But you agree, at least that would have been a better approach, to have a united front going into this, interaction with both government and employers and then private employers, etc.
Now, I've said that if NAGRAT had, I would have loved to have it myself. Okay. I would have loved to have it. And in fact, at the conference, there were a number of ways in which leadership of the unions actually conferred on the issues. In fact, after the opening, and the opening was just about the contextual issues, some of the issues you raised before this discussion. In the evening, the Secretary General called or asked all the labor unions to remain in the room. And then a lot of pep talks were undertaken. I wouldn't say it's the kind of caucus NAGRAT wanted. But, I mean, in this game, we need to be open-minded, and we need to see that our interests are common. So if NAGRAT had the idea that let's have a caucus, I'm not sure anybody within the labor fraternity would have said no to such an idea.
Okay, quickly, I'll get Dr. Bedkusi's input on this.
Yes, well, we are not bantering each other here. The conference is taking place.
In fact, it's done now with the communique out.
Yes, the conference is taking place. Communique is out. The economic realities are still biting us. We need to harness resources, energies to come together to see how we sit with government to immediately address the concerns and needs of our members.
But that's what he went to do. That's the whole idea.
No, the conference was not a platform for negotiation.
Okay.
Yes, the conference was not a platform for negotiation. And let me tell you that in April this year, we are supposed to reconvene the Public Services Joint Negotiation Committee for us to negotiate salaries and income.
For next year?
Yeah, for next year. But the teacher unions are even calling that, looking at the dire economic situation that confronts us now, government can come out with some cost of living allowance to cushion us from the pressures as we experience.
Realistically?
Well, I cannot die before I get something next year.
How do you call this? Cost of living allowance?
Yeah, it's cooler.
Yeah. Because of the current...
Yeah, because of the current... I mean, for example, if my wife goes to buy gas today, she's going to fill half cylinder. And that is a reality. If I have to take trotro from Medina to Accra, I'll have to pay 15% more.
Okay.
If I have to go to the restaurant, pay for goods and services, I'm going to pay in relation to the depreciation of the city. These are real situations confronting us as I speak to you. And somebody ought to sit with me or with us to see how we can cushion workers from these pressures. That's
an interesting point. Let me throw that to Dr. Samobet Boedikusi Wayuta. I mean, Doc, what do you say to that? That your colleague teachers at the before tertiary, pre-tertiary, are thinking about asking for cost of living allowance. Well, what's your take on that?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think that looking at the current situation we find ourselves in, they are justified in asking for something to cushion them. But obviously, of course, I'm sure the other side, the employer, will normally want to come and say that, look, we find ourselves in a crisis situation, a situation where the economy, we are not even meeting revenue targets and all that. But the worker actually deserves some level of cushioning. And I think that any person, even from the employer side, will agree. As to the quantum, it's another thing. But if anything like that is going to happen, probably it will be an interim measure or a temporal measure. But I think that largely we need to, as has been echoed, we need to move beyond these temporal measures to have a holistic view, a holistic review, and a bit more proactive way of addressing wages and salaries in the country, because it has not taken us just this time. It's been long when we noticed that the single sign salary structure has issues. For instance, we are boxed between some levels, and if you check the way things are from one level to the other, when you get promotion, you expect that you are happy, you have been promoted. But in real terms, what comes to you when you have been promoted is very meager. And so I think that yes, they are justified in asking for something that will cushion them. But I think that we need to move beyond that and be more proactive and address the issues of salaries and wages in a way that is more sustainable, in a way that will make the worker happy. And of course, also be able to help in productivity. I mean, yes, if we are asking for more, of course, we expect that our output will also be well measured. And if you look at the work we do in producing training brains, it is what is going to transform the economy. And so there is a need for us to place premium on what will transform the economy. And so I want to believe that my colleagues are well justified to ask for what they are asking for.
I mean, Dr. Otu, cost of living allowance, what's your take on that on the back of the current economic conditions?
The Evans, the labor scene is a complex scene. I am a researcher, and I know, for example, that in this country there are over 150 registered unions.
Wow.
is a very complex terrain. And I've had the opportunity of drafting a proposal for cost of living allowance for this year. I have. We tested the terrain. And some people, and I wonder the information that the workers in the education sector or the unions there, we tested it among some of them, and people were like, okay, in April, as Angel Carboni said, we will have to negotiate for 2023. Okay, between now and April, if you do that cost of living allowance, and then you come back in April and do 2023, what is the likelihood of your success for 2023? How do you balance the gains for the cost of living and all that? So discussions have been had on this, but I can tell you there hasn't been consensus.
Okay.
People think, okay, let's put our energies in getting something good for 2023. Cost of living allowance can cushion us for a while, but it will have impact. For example, it won't have much impact, or if anything, negative impact on our pensions. It won't go into your pension calculation and all that. It could cushion workers for a while in the interim. But as the last speaker said, I mean, for those of us who have taken time to look at the single span salary structure and have done analysis of it since 2012, since 2010, we know there are fundamental challenges with it. Yes, we agree we need to find ways to address the current challenges, but we should not take our eyes off addressing the perennial, persistent challenges that have attended the implementation of public sector pay. And part of what we want to do is to take a holistic look at the pay regime in the public service, including the single span. We definitely have our eyes on the current challenges. We need to deal with it. But the long-term measures are also important, and we need to be able to address it.
It's interesting. I'm delighted that you say that there's some research that TUC has done on this area, because then it informs the conversation. So from the research you've done, is the point that so far, where are you leaning towards based on what you know, based on our research? Is it leaning towards cost of living allowance, not a good idea now, focus rather on getting some, proper salaries agreed in April for next year?
What I said was that we thought of doing a proposal for cost of living allowance.
Okay. As in making a request of government for that for workers.
But to go ahead with that, you need to get the other labor groups around it. And in such caucus dialogue with amongst ourselves, people come up with different strategies as to how to deal with their challenges. And I'm telling you that as at now, we do not seem to have a consensus around a cost of living, even though we are still talking amongst ourselves.
Okay, I mean, that's an interesting point, I think.
Yes, of course. NAGRAT is not the only union. Like it's indicated, we have over 150 registered unions. And again, that is why it is always very important for labor itself to constantly engage itself and take common positions. Because of course, it doesn't mean that when NAGRAT makes a statement, or NAT makes a statement, or the teacher group makes a statement, it becomes a binding statement. And because, in the current dispensation, like we started this conversation, the moment you isolate people, you are creating more problems. And that was even the basis for the principle of the single spine, that all public sector workers will be on a spine. Unfortunately, as we went along, certain people started dropping off the spine left, right, and center, and so on. We shouldn't have had an Article 70.
We've lost the spine.
We've lost the spine.
So you're not going to put all the Article 70 to everybody on that same spine.
That's right. However, NAGRAT is a team player.
Okay.
And they can all tell you, NAGRAT is a very vital team player. We have made our proposal. We are ready to take our proposal to the table. In-house among labor, if it is not popular, what then is popular? If it is not workable, what then is workable? At the end of the day, our agenda is to uplift the living standards of workers.
But that's a very interesting catch-22. So I think the two options I hear from that straw survey before the proposal was, in essence, do you get the COLA now? Because obviously, clearly, as we illustrated, we have an immediate problem.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
But then that will erode your ability to ask for a big jump for next year.
I don't see that at all. You know, Labour goes onto the table with the economic realities of the time. You understand? And Labour do not go down there to frolic with government on some of these issues. Dr. Kusi himself is a very astute researcher and all that. So people get prepared. We have our documents, we have facts and figures to back our demands. And our demands are just a reflection of the realities of the economic situation we find ourselves. So we put those before government, indicate to government certain indices that warrant increase in salaries and emolument.
In this case, the allowance for to deal with the current
both the current difficulties
and the long term.
You understand?
In other words, what you're saying is that there's no problem getting the allowance now.
Yes, I don't see how
and then
giving something now obviates our ability to
get something significant.
No, absolutely not. Yes.
But you raise a point I need to interrogate, because if what you're saying is true, do you accept that the economy is hard for government first, and then because the economy is hard for government, it trickles to everybody's pocket, the government simply is broke and hasn't got anything to give you?
The government is not having that type of conversation with us.
Well, the finance minister has said it publicly last week at one of the dialogues to UTAC, in fact, to UTAC, that yeah, it's legitimate demand, but it's also legitimate. In fact, those are his words, to paraphrase. You have a legitimate demand, but it's also legitimate that we don't have.
Yes. You know, if government sits with labor, if government sits with stakeholders and tell people confidently and truthfully that it is broke,
but you know government is broke.
No, you know, the people will also demand certain behavioral changes in government itself. Are you with me? Yeah. So you don't just come and tell me you are broke and I accept it hook, line and sinker.
But the evidence shows government is broke.
I don't see that.
Why don't you see? I mean, the numbers I show tells a story.
Okay, so let me ask you a question. Will a broke government be giving freebies to people?
No, that shouldn't happen. But what freebies is that?
But, Evans, a government that is broke will not take certain decisions. A government that is broke will not be spending money in certain other areas. And I don't want to veer into areas where people will think I'm sounding political. You understand? If you are not able to generate more than 35% of internally generated revenue, you know, what then is your strength to be able to engage in certain social intervention activities when you know that the total amount of money you spend in social intervention activity outweigh even the total amount of money you generate internally?
I mean, Dr. Kusi, it is really also about government's ability to pay, the employer's ability to pay. Will you concede that with everything that is happening at the global level and how it's trickled down, and again the economy is struggling, government simply isn't in the position to give you what you want and to improve your working conditions now, and possibly in the short to medium term, government will not be able to do what you probably want? Do you accept that?
Yes, my brother, you see, you are right, but we need to put that in context. As workers, I want to believe that we are very reasonable people. And so if we have a conversation around the table in a fair, frank, honest manner, workers will be able to reason and say that, yes, we appreciate the situation. How much can you do? To what extent can you go? Such that all of us, we don't jeopardize the economy. We don't get into where we don't want to go. And even within the bigger picture, is it only when it comes to workers that we begin to realize that the economy is bad and we cannot pay? Within the government sector, what are the measures that we are all putting in place to ensure that indeed we are all living according to the dictates of we operating within a very bad economic situation? So if it is a collective effort, if it is a collective thing that all of us are interested in saying that, well, we think that the situation is bad and therefore we cannot do X, Y, Z. Should it always be about the worker sacrifice? I think that that should not always be the case. Everybody within the economic space must be seen to be sacrifices. But in the situations where others are always prevailed upon to sacrifice, and others are not seen in that light, it creates a certain distortion. And so in as much as I agree that yes, within the economic space, government may not be able to afford. I think that when we sit around the table and talk, surely we will be able to find a reasonable point of convergence so that we are able to make headway in all these situations that we find ourselves.
I mean, Dr. Otto at the TUC, how much, first of all, do you accept that government simply hasn't got, can't pay, can't do anything this year, possibly in a medium to long term to improve the conditions of workers? Hello, Dr. Otto.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can now, yes.
So, I mean, the deficit figures you showed clearly says that the economy is in hard times. Of course, yesterday I also showed figures that compares, for example, the average wage on a single span in 2022 with the cost of living index, and money to show that workers are also in serious deficit. Are dealing with two deficits here, and we must bear that one in mind. So if you are a worker on a single span, the average pay there is 1,800.
The average pay is 1,800. Okay.
You have to back for your children's education. You have to rent a house. You have to do all those things. And there are figures from the SASCA service, that expenditure data, that allows us to do, and we're able to estimate. So we are dealing with two deficits. So clearly the economy is in difficulty. I wouldn't say that because of that government cannot do anything at all. Government has to do something, because in fact, if you look at the worker side, there's a larger deficit than even what you see at the macro level. So government ought to be able to do something. But we also ought to be able to and doing that something does not mean that government is able to erase completely our deficit, the micro level deficit. Okay, something has to give. It also then means that on both sides there has to be some sacrifices. But Evans, we have been here before. In 2015, in actual 2014, we accepted a COLA. A COLA is an allowance, it's not a salary increase. So in actual fact, when we do salary analysis, there was a 0% increase in 2014. In 2015, we were given 13%, but the 10% COLA was taken off, meaning we had only 3% in 2015. We were making sacrifices. But what really came out of that sacrifice is the question we need to answer. So part of what we try to do as Senche was that if there are difficulties, like my two panelists have said, it has to be reflected in the lives, actions of those managing the economy.
Okay. In what specific ways do you want to see this reflected?
My colleagues have made a number of points already.
Okay.
Sometimes the actions, I mean, sometimes people even make reference to cars people drive and all that, you understand? You may think that these are not important things, but actually it gets into the psyche of people. And it's important. Okay. And you have to deal with it. So what we try to do as Senche is that government has to do something. We have to make some sacrifices. But over a given period, where will that sacrifices end us? Will it end us like we have currently today? Or it will end in a better remuneration for people in the public sector? If that conversation is what we want to have, then we thought that the single span salary structure itself has to be reviewed. And it has to, it's no longer a matter of percentage, 10%, 10, 15%. You can, it's always possible to get those percentages. But really, will it take us where we are supposed to be as workers? Will it enable the lecturers get a pay that is commensurate with the work they do and the stature they have in society? That is the conversation we need to have. Okay. So my point is that, I mean, government is hard pressed by us to do something to offset the deficit at the micro level. But we also admit that given the context in which we find ourselves, some level of sacrifice is in order. But where will it end? Will it end as with a better remuneration system than we currently have? Or the sacrifice goes on, and then we really see nothing at the end of the day?
There's something you said that struck me. You say the average public sector worker on the single spine is taking home 1,800 cedis.
Yes.
Wow.
That's the average pay on the single spine.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it is even lower when you do the average within the pre-tertiary teacher level.
But, so that will be what?
Yeah, so for example, a fresh graduate
Okay.
from the university into the Ghana Education Service is taking less than 1,600 a month.
So that's less than that?
Yes, and then the headmaster of Presec and Achimota do not have their salaries more than 3,500.
Oh, please.
No, I'm telling you. You can check.
Presec?
The
A
Presec.
headmaster?
Yeah, the headmaster.
So this is take home, right?
That is take home, yes.
Less than 3,000?
Yes.
Less than 3,000?
Yes.
You're kidding me.
No, I'm telling you the fact. You can check.
In today's Ghana?
Yes, in today's Ghana.
How are they surviving?
Well.
So this is the headmaster?
Yeah, that's the headmaster.
So what about the teachers?
Well.
Because they are supposed to be the best paid, like, you know, and then they...
So I'm talking about Achimota, I'm talking about Presec, I'm talking about Infant Supreme, I'm talking about Wesley Girls.
Less than 3,000 cedis?
Yes. Take home.
Wow. And we've been talking about depreciation.
Yes.
30-something% increase in LPG.
Yes.
Definitely he's buying gas.
Yes.
Fuel prices have gone up.
So when you interrogate the specifics of incomes at different sectors and at different services, that is when the disparity will begin to start hitting you realistically. Yes.
I mean, rarely do stuff really surprise me, but I didn't think that was that.
Well, that's a fact.
Let me bring in the UTAG. Dr. Bankusi, I mean, so if it's less than 3,000 for a headmaster, you're really good then at UTAG, because UTAG you take quite a substantial amount of money, but you still want more.
Not substantial. I mean, the average lecturer, I mean, the entry point lecturer who has come in with a PhD, studied, I mean, you know it, done your undergraduate, done your master's, done your PhD, you come in and your take home is roughly around 5,000. So it's not that substantial. I mean, given where we are and given all the responsibilities and given the workload, think of it. I mean, all the students that are coming, if you go to, the lecturer-student ratio really beyond what is, I mean, comprehensible. I mean, you have lecture sizes of 800,000. You know it. You can go to University of Ghana, University of Cape Coast, KNUST and check. Meanwhile, I mean, the regulator has the norms. The lecturer is doing far more work than he's supposed to do. So if you put all these things in context, and at the end of the day, I mean, having studied for all these years, and at the end of the day, he's taking, I mean, the entry point lecturer is taking roughly around 5,000. I mean, that is not something that we can say is good. Not at all.
Let's end on the other side of the coin. And productivity. So you're asking for more. You want more. You're paying less than 3,000. You had it. But
the owner,
why is the productivity question?
The owner of the job should put in measures to ensure productivity is high, and to establish the standard to ensure that every worker he or she employs performs within its frame of productivity.
Why are you putting the responsibility on the board?
No, that the worker is not resisted. The worker is not indicated that he or she does not want to work. The work belongs to you. put in framework and measures to ensure that productivity is high.
So you're saying that if the employer fails that responsibility,
Yes, then you don't blame the worker. And let me tell you, productivity is low at certain places because even the tools needed and necessary for productivity to be high do not even exist.
I mean, Dr. Otu, 30 seconds, is that the approach, that the employer's responsibility to ensure productivity?
Productivity is that the employer has a role to play, the workers also have a role to play. Because if you leave it only to the employer, in the manner in which my senior colleague, Angel, just put it, they may take measures that will affect negatively some of our members, workers. And that is to say, for example, that there are also responsibilities to do the right thing. So, for example, if that is the case and the employer goes strict on the lateness to work and all the stuff, you can then actually have a situation where.
Yeah. I mean, Doc, I'm grateful. Dr. Bakusi, thank you very much, Doc, but a very revealing conversation indeed. Less than 3,000 cedis for a headmaster. As they say, Ghanaian workers, they are magicians. God bless all of them for putting your lives on the line for Ghana, for God and